Thunder creeps across the horizon like an ancient beast awakening beneath the skin of the sky. The air grows dense, heavy, almost unbreathable, charged with electricity and promises of change. The first drop falls on the parched earth, raising a small cloud of dust, then another. In a matter of minutes, the rain ceases to be a timid announcement and transforms into a thick curtain that batters the ground, the pastures and the dry riverbeds. The Pantanal, the world's largest continuous wetland, is beginning to transform once again. Where yesterday there were cracks in the mud, today water patiently seeps through, reclaiming ancient paths it never forgot. The rivers swell, overflow, and connect with each other, forming a living network that covers thousands of square kilometers. The boundary between land and water ceases to exist, and the entire landscape enters a state of permanent transition. In this place, rain doesn't bring calm, it brings movement, it brings an explosion of life that awakens creatures that seemed dormant and forces others to move, to seek shelter or food. Fish that were trapped in narrow channels during the dry season now find new routes and venture into newly created waters. Entire schools move across the floodplains, exploring spaces that exist only for a few months of the year. Birds return from distant regions, drawn by the sudden abundance. Herons, ibises, spoonbills and storks fill the sky with white wings and harsh cries. Each knows this is the time to feed, to reproduce, to take advantage of the water's temporary bounty. Vegetation, dormant beneath the dust, sprouts with almost violent speed. Green shoots emerge from the mud, new leaves unfurl in a matter of days, and the landscape changes color as if someone had flipped an invisible switch. But where there is abundance, there is competition. Where life bursts forth, hunger also awakens. The Pantanal is not a tranquil paradise, it is a field of forces in constant tension. Each creature interprets the arrival of water as a different opportunity. For some, it means easy food. For others, it means exposure, forced displacement, risk. On this chessboard that reshapes itself with every rain, the rivers become hunting grounds and invisible borders that must be defended. On the water's surface, the reflection of the sky appears tranquil, but beneath that apparent calm, a silent war is being waged. A movement breaks the river's stillness. It's not the wind, its bodies cutting through the current with an energy that makes no attempt to hide. Giant otters emerge like living arrows, their dark backs gleaming in the grey light of the overcast sky. They don't arrive silently. They announce themselves with squeals, growls, and deep vocalizations that echo along the riverbank. Their presence is not discreet, it's a statement. In these stretches of the river, there are owners, and they don't hide. Giant otters are the most powerful social predators in these waters. They don't hunt alone, they don't move randomly. They function as a compact unit, an extended family that moves with a coordination that seems rehearsed over generations. The group moves upstream, following the current that carries debris such as branches, leaves, and fish disoriented by the sudden change in water level. The dominant pair leads the way, their larger bodies bearing scars that speak of past conflicts. The young swim alongside, attentive to the group's signals, wordlessly learning when to move forward and when to stop. There are no exaggerated gestures or audible commands for those who don't know how to observe. A subtle change in speed, a slight turn of the body, a pause of barely a second, and everyone understands that something has been detected beneath the surface. A school of fish gathers near the shore, seeking refuge among the submerged roots of a fallen tree. The murky water gives them a false sense of security. The otters silently separate, forming an almost perfect semicircle. Two dive and move underneath, pushing the school toward shallower water. Others remain on the surface, blocking escape routes. The youngest wait motionless, their bodies tense, ready to close the trap. In a matter of seconds, the water churns. A splash breaks the surface, and an otter emerges with a large fish caught in its teeth. The prey thrashes, slapping the water, but the bite is firm. No energy is wasted. The group gathers, the fish is shared, and the river seems calm again, as if nothing had happened. In the Pantanal, eating is never an isolated act. It is a moment of vulnerability. While the group feeds, attention is divided between the food and vigilance. The leader frequently raises his head, sniffs the damp air, and scans the opposite bank. The presence of otters does not go unnoticed by other predators. Beneath the surface, something moves with a slowness that betrays not intention, but power. Two eyes barely emerge from the water, separated by a distance that reveals the size of the hidden body. The black caiman patrols the same stretch of river. Its dark skin blends into the mud, its silhouette barely distinguishable in the turbidity. It has no need to hurry. The caiman is patient by nature. Its strategy is not pursuit, but waiting. The otters sense this presence even if they can't see it clearly. The river's history is written in past encounters. A sharp cry from the leader is enough to bring the group together, forming a mass of bodies that move together towards shallower water. They don't disperse. The strength of the otters lies not in a single individual, but in the group as a whole. The caiman assesses the scene. Attacking a lone otter is one thing. Confronting an entire family is quite another. For a few seconds, both predators share the same space without attacking each other, gauging their strength without making contact. Then the caiman dives again and disappears into the shadows of the seabed. The tension dissipates, but it doesn't completely vanish. In the Pantanal, calm is always temporary. As the sun begins to set and the light softens, the otter family heads toward their refuge on the riverbank. Among tangled roots and piles of logs, they have built a safe haven where the pups can rest and play. The youngsters chase each other, leap into the shallow water, and playfully nip at one another in a training exercise disguised as play. The adults observe without intervening, knowing that these practices are lessons for the future. Each controlled bite, each brief dive, each clumsy chase is a rehearsal for a life in which mistakes are costly. The leader stays close to the water, body facing the river, alert to any change on the surface. Beneath that same surface, life is organized in invisible layers. A school of piranhas moves as a single entity, changing direction with synchronized movements. Their silvery bodies reflect flashes of light as they approach the surface, and their jaws, armed with razor-sharp teeth, open and close with mechanical precision. Piranhas are often portrayed as voracious monsters, but their role in the Pantanal is more complex. They are opportunistic predators, yes, capable of attacking in groups when hunger strikes or when they detect blood in the water. But they are also cleaners of the ecosystem. They consume organic remains, eliminate dead or injured animals, and reduce the accumulation of decomposing matter in waters that constantly change in level and composition. Their presence maintains the chemical and biological balance of the river, even though their reputation inspires fear. For the giant otter, the piranha is not a symbol of terror. It is just another prey animal, armed, yes, but manageable. An otter dives and emerges with a piranha caught in its teeth. The fish tries to bite, but the otter's bite is faster, stronger. In seconds, the threat is neutralized. In this ecosystem, ferocity is relative. What is dangerous to some is food for others. The hierarchy is not based on myth, but on actual effectiveness. Beyond the otter's field of vision, in an area where the water thickens and aquatic plants form a dense network, lies a motionless body. The anaconda, the world's largest snake, waits. It doesn't move. Its skin blends into the shadows, the submerged branches, the dark mud of the bottom. Only its eyes break the surface, two motionless points that register every vibration. The anaconda doesn't hunt. It doesn't need to. The Pantanal brings its prey. Water rats, birds that come down to drink, unsuspecting capybaras, young caimans that get too close. The anaconda's strategy is simple and brutal. Wait until its prey enters its range. A small mammal approaches the shore, drawn by the scent of fresh plants sprouting after the rain. It senses no danger. The attack is instantaneous. The anaconda's body launches itself with a speed that contrasts sharply with its previous stillness. It coils around its prey, squeezing with a force that stops circulation in seconds. There are no screams, no prolonged struggle. Movement ceases, and the water closes in once more. The anaconda then begins a slow process of ingestion. Swallow, digest, disappear. For hours or days, its metabolism focuses on processing the food. During this time, its mobility diminishes. The hunter becomes vulnerable. In the Pantanal, even the most efficient killers have moments of weakness. Meanwhile, at the edge of the forest, the soft ground holds small, nervous footprints. A pack of coatis moves through the damp leaves, their tails raised like flags. They move with restless energy, sniffing, stirring the leaf litter, climbing fallen logs. Their nimble paws search for insects hidden beneath the bark, fallen fruit and seeds. The young mimic the adults' every move, learning what smells like food and what smells like danger. The herd doesn't stay in one place for long. Their strategy is constant movement, continuous exploration that reduces the risk of being surprised by a predator. As they move, coatis unknowingly disperse seeds. The fruits they eat leave behind fragments that will germinate into new shoots. Their passage through the forest is not only in search of food, but also shapes the future of the vegetation. But this noisy activity does not go unnoticed. A rustling sound, distinct from the leaves under their paws, rises from the undergrowth. The group stops. The cubs huddle together in the center. The adults turn their heads toward the source of the sound. For a few seconds, the forest seems to hold its breath. A feline watches from the shadows. The jaguar assesses the situation. The pack is large and alert. The risk of a failed attack is high. The jaguar retreats almost unnoticed. The danger dissipates, but the tension leaves its mark on the group's behavior. The coatis resume their march, more attentive and quieter for a few minutes. Above the canopy, a shadow crosses the sky. A bird of prey glides with outstretched wings, taking advantage of the air currents rising from the damp earth. From that height, the forest is a mosaic of greens and reflections in the water. The bird doesn't need to flap its wings forcefully. It observes. It looks for the movement that deviates from the pattern, the slightest error that betrays potential prey. Below, a group of monkeys moves among the branches, focused on ripe fruit that sprouted after the rain. One lags behind, distracted. The shadow aligns. The descent is swift, almost vertical. The impact happens in the blink of an eye. The claws close, the cry is lost in the foliage, and the bird soars again with its prey. The other monkeys flee, emitting alarm calls that echo through the forest. Balance appears to be restored, but the message remains clear. In the Pantanal, distraction is an invitation to death. The rain continues to fall intermittently. Sometimes it's a fine drizzle, sometimes a downpour that drowns out all other sounds. Each phase of the storm alters the creature's behavior. Some take advantage of the noise to move undetected. Others seek shelter, waiting for the water to recede. The rivers continue to swell, connecting lagoons that were once isolated. The landscape expands and contracts with a logic that doesn't follow human maps, but rather ancient cycles. The Pantanal is not a static place. It is a dynamic process. With each flood, the temporary rules of survival are rewritten. Territories expand or shrink, hunting routes shift, and encounters between predators become more frequent. The rainy season marks the beginning of this complex game, a prelude to what will come when the water begins to recede and competition intensifies around the last remaining pockets of water. For now, water reigns supreme. It covers, connects, confuses. Predators hone their strategies in a world that has suddenly become larger. Prey learn new escape routes or perish trying. The Pantanal breathes to the rhythm of the rain, and every creature that inhabits it knows that this rebirth is not a priceless gift. It is the beginning of a cycle that later will reveal its harshest face when the water recedes and everything is exposed. The water level continues to rise for days, sometimes for weeks, until the Pantanal ceases to be a network of rivers and lagoons and becomes a single body of water stretching as far as the eye can see. Dirt roads disappear beneath the surface. Patches of vegetation transform into floating archipelagos, and trees seem to emerge directly from the river, their trunks half submerged. In this new fluid map, every creature must relearn how to move, how to orient itself, how to survive. What was once a safe path is now a deep trap. What was once an obstacle is now a temporary refuge. The landscape changes so rapidly that individual memory becomes as important as physical strength. Animals that remember where to find higher ground during floods have an advantage. Those that don't improvise or disappear. Capybaras congregate in increasingly large groups on the few remaining rises above the water. Families that kept separate during the dry season now share the same cramped space. Their bulky bodies crowd onto patches of dry land, with the juveniles in the center and the adults forming an outer ring of constant vigilance. The sound of water lapping at the edges of the islet accompanies their slow breathing. Although excellent swimmers, they prefer to maintain a dry foothold to rest and keep watch. Their dark eyes scan the surroundings with almost constant attention. They know that the water is a refuge, but it is also the domain of other predators. A movement on the surface of the water, barely a ripple different from the pattern of the rain, is enough to make several heads turn at the same time. The caiman patrols the islet's periphery, moving with calculated slowness. It doesn't approach immediately. It gauges the group's density, watching to see if any hatchlings stray from the group. The caiman's hunt is not a race. It's an exercise in patience. They can wait hours, even days, until the mistake appears. The capybaras, for their part, take turns keeping watch. One individual moves a few steps ahead, sniffs the air, and observes the water's surface. If it detects danger, it emits a short, low-pitched sound. In a split second, the entire group is on high alert, ready to plunge into the water in a coordinated escape. The balance between calm and flight defines their daily survival. Meanwhile, in the areas where the forest is partially submerged, tree trunks emerge like dark columns from the murky water. Long shadows move among them. They are marsh deer, advancing with a slow elegance that seems almost out of place in such an unstable environment. Their long legs allow them to wade through waters that would reach the bellies of other herbivores. Each step is measured, each hoof pressing firmly on the crumbling ground beneath the surface. The deer doesn't run unless necessary. It knows that in deep water, the splashing noise can attract the attention of unseen predators. It prefers to move calmly, keeping its body high and its head erect, listening to the sounds that travel across the water's surface. The scent of damp mud, newly sprouted aquatic plants, and animals clustered in small spaces mingles in the air. For a terrestrial predator, this new environment presents a challenge. The jaguar, accustomed to hunting on land and in the dense forest, adapts its strategy. It doesn't avoid the water. On the contrary, it becomes a silent swimmer when necessary. Its muscular body glides through the newly formed channels, using the floating vegetation for cover. From the bank, it observes the groups of capybaras huddled on the islets. It doesn't attack immediately. It waits until one gets too close to the edge, until exhaustion lowers its guard. In the rainy season, the abundance of prey doesn't mean the hunt is easier. The unstable terrain, the water that muffles sounds, and the animals' dispersal force the jaguar to be even more precise. At a bend in the river where the current slows and the water forms a dark pool, the jaguar stops. Its eyes follow the movement of a young capybara that approaches to drink, having strayed a few steps from the main group. The distance is short, but the water in between is deep. The jaguar dives silently, leaving barely a trace on the surface. It moves forward with its body almost entirely underwater, its legs moving with a rhythm that doesn't create a splash. When it surfaces, it does so just a few meters from the islet's shore. The attack is swift, but not always successful. The capybara detects the movement at the last second and plunges into the water, hitting the surface with a noise that alerts the group. The entire islet seems to explode in motion. Dozens of bodies plunge into the water at the same time, creating a chaotic mess of splashes and ripples. The jaguar misses its prey and remains motionless for a moment, assessing whether to pursue a target now lost among many others. It decides to retreat. In the Pantanal, even the most efficient hunter must accept failure as part of the game. In the deeper waters, where aquatic vegetation forms green tunnels, large fish move more freely during the flood. The bright and swift piraputanga explores the newly flooded areas. Its elongated body is designed to swim against gentle currents and to turn quickly among submerged roots. This fish is a key link in the Pantanal food web. It eats fruit that falls from the branches into the water, carries seeds downstream, and in turn becomes prey for birds, otters, and caimans. During the rainy season, the piraputanga ventures into areas that dry up during the dry season. There it finds abundant food, but also new dangers. Waterfowl, concentrated along the edges of newly formed channels, take advantage of these movements to hunt with ease. A heron stands motionless on the edge of a flooded clearing, its neck curled in an S shape. Its eyes follow every silvery glimmer beneath the surface. Suddenly, its neck springs back and its beak plunges into the water. A fish is caught. The heron shakes its head, swallows, and returns to its motionless posture. A few meters away, a group of birds takes turns feeding on the same school of fish. During the rainy season, competition among birds is intense, but the abundance allows several species to share the same space without direct confrontations. Each occupies a slightly different niche, a different depth, and employs a different hunting technique. In the dense flooded forest, the sounds change. The constant lapping of water against the tree trunks creates a soundscape that masks even the smallest movements. Here, predators that rely on hearing to detect prey must recalibrate their perception. Monkeys move along the highest branches, avoiding the water whenever possible. The floodwaters have reduced the terrestrial pathways they use to move between patches of forest, forcing them to leap greater distances between treetops. One wrong move could mean a fall into the water, where the risk is multiplied. Infants cling to their mother's fur more tightly than ever. Every crossing between branches is a test of coordination and muscle memory. During one of these movements, a young monkey slips. Its body falls several meters before it manages to grab hold of a lower branch. The sound of the fall echoes through the flooded forest. For a moment, everything stops. The adults emit alarm calls, the young huddle together. Below, the water's surface remains still, but that stillness is not reassuring. Beneath it, the caiman patrols. The monkey manages to climb back to the safety of the canopy, but the message is clear. The water has reduced the margin for error. In the rainy season, every step, every jump, every decision becomes more costly. In an area where the river widens and the current carries away vegetation debris, the otter family reappears. They move through a channel that didn't exist weeks ago, exploring the expanded territory. For them, the flooding represents an expansion of opportunities. More fish, more movement routes, more spaces to establish temporary hunting positions. However, it also means more frequent encounters with other aquatic predators. In this stretch of the river, the water is deeper and darker. Visibility is reduced to just a few centimeters. The otters rely on the vibrations of the water, the feel of the sensitive whiskers around their snouts, and the memory of the currents. They move in loose formation, letting the most experienced individuals lead the exploration. A sudden movement on the bottom alerts the group. It's not a fish, it's a large body moving slowly, stirring up sediment. The caiman partially emerges, revealing the top of its skull and its eyes. The otters immediately gather together. They don't flee, but they don't approach either. The silent exchange of assessments takes place once more. The caiman calculates the number of individuals, their size, their readiness to defend themselves. The otters calculate the distance to shallower waters. After a few tense seconds, they separate. Neither has obtained what they sought, but both have avoided a potentially costly confrontation. In the Pantanal, survival depends not only on the ability to kill, but also on the ability to choose when not to. As the rain begins to ease and the sky clears in patches, the flooded landscape reflects fragments of blue between the clouds. The water looks like a broken mirror, multiplying the light. The creatures move within this ever-changing reflection, adapting to a world that has grown in every direction. The rainy season is generous, but it is not eternal. All the inhabitants of the Pantanal, from the largest predator to the smallest fish, know that this excess of water is temporary. At some point, the level will begin to recede, the channels will narrow, the islets will become dry land, and then abundance will be concentrated in a few places, transforming the competition into something even more fierce. The water reaches its peak and then, almost imperceptibly at first, begins to recede. It is neither an immediate nor a uniform retreat. Some channels narrow in a matter of days, while others retain their depth for weeks. The Pantanal enters an intermediate phase, a time of transition in which abundance still exists but begins to concentrate. What was once a continuous sea of water fragments into lagoons connected by trickles of current. The fish that dispersed during the flood are now forced to return to more defined channels. The birds adjust their feeding routes. Large herbivores, which had found temporary refuge on isolated elevations, are beginning to descend toward grasslands that are slowly emerging from the water. This widespread movement creates a new map of opportunities and risks. The still saturated soils release a strong odor of decomposing organic matter. The vegetation that sprouted vigorously during the flood is now more accessible to herbivores. The capybaras disperse in smaller groups, taking advantage of the young grasses that appear along the edges of the receding lagoons. Their bodies, covered in dried mud in some areas, move with an apparent calm that masks a constant state of alertness. The concentration of animals around dwindling water sources increases the risk of encounters with predators. The edges of the lagoons become scenes of silent tension, where every step can be observed by unseen eyes. The caiman, which patrolled vast stretches of water during the floods, is now forced to share increasingly smaller spaces with other individuals. Deep pools become contested territories. A large caiman occupies the center of a lagoon that shrinks day by day. Its motionless body seems part of the landscape, but any intruder that gets too close receives a warning, a slap of its tail against the water, a deep sound that travels across the surface. Smaller individuals stay on the margins, waiting for an opportunity or seeking other refuge. Forced concentration increases the likelihood of conflict. Occasionally, two alligators confront each other in dominance rituals, raising their heads, inflating their bodies, and clashing jaws without actually biting. Injuries are not always avoided. During the transition season, competition for space intensifies. For fish, the receding water is a direct threat. The isolated lagoons begin to heat up faster under the sun. Dissolved oxygen decreases, the temperature rises, and the density of individuals increases. The piraputanga, accustomed to moving in open water during high water, finds itself trapped in confined spaces alongside hundreds of other fish. Stress alters their behavior. Schools of fish become more compact, their movements more erratic. For predators, this concentration is an opportunity. Waterfowl gather at the edges of the lagoons, forming veritable hunting lines. Herons, spoonbills, and cormorants take advantage of the proximity of the prey to feed quickly. Each peck removes a fish from the system, reducing the density, but also feeding the predators that depend on this phase of the cycle. Giant otters are adapting to this new scenario quickly. Where they once traveled great distances to find scattered prey, they now concentrate their activity in lagoons that are shrinking day by day. The group moves from one body of water to another, following a pattern that combines memory and exploration. They know which lagoons dry up first, which ones retain fish for longer. The hunt becomes more intense, but also more dangerous. In confined spaces, encounters with caimans are more frequent. Otters modify their strategy, hunting along the edges of lagoons where they can escape to land if necessary. Even so, the risk of a direct confrontation increases. Concentrated abundance brings with it an increase in potential violence. In the areas where the forest re-emerges from the water, the trails become active again. The damp mud preserves the tracks of every animal that passes by. The jaguar patrols these paths with almost obsessive attention. He reads the markings on the ground like a living map. Fresh capybara tracks, marsh deer trails, drag marks left by an alligator moving from one lagoon to another. Each sign tells him about the presence of prey, but also about competition. The jaguar isn't the only hunter in this reshaping landscape. Other jaguars, ocelots, and pumas patrol territories that now overlap more due to the reduction of habitable areas. Space shrinks, pressure mounts. In a transition zone between grassland and forest, the jaguar pauses in the shade of a tree partially exposed by the receding water. From there it observes a rapidly shrinking lagoon. A group of capybaras approaches to drink, forming an irregular line at the water's edge. The jaguar doesn't move, it waits. It knows that the day's heat will cause the animals to lower their guard momentarily, that the accumulated fatigue from days of moving across wet terrain will slow their reflexes. The moment arrives when a young capybara takes a few steps further than necessary. The attack is brief, explosive. The jaguar emerges from the vegetation and covers the distance in seconds. The prey tries to flee toward the water, but the muddy ground makes it slip. The jaguar catches it and drags it into the forest canopy. The rest of the group flees, kicking up a cloud of mud and water. Silence returns to the edge of the lagoon, but the message is etched in the group's memory. Receding water concentrates danger. In the treetops, fruit-eating birds take advantage of the post-flood period to feed on fruits that ripened quickly thanks to the accumulated moisture. Toucans, macaws, and other species move among the trees, which are now more accessible from the ground. Their activity not only feeds the birds themselves, but also redistributes seeds across the emerging landscape. The fruits fall to the ground or into the stagnant water of lagoons, where fish and other animals consume or transport them. The network of interactions becomes more complex at this stage of the cycle. Every movement of a bird affects multiple levels of the ecosystem, even though the act itself may seem simple. At the edges of the forest, coatis reappear in areas that were covered with water during the flood. They sift through the damp leaf litter in search of insects that congregated on the ground after the water receded. Their noisy activity attracts birds that take advantage of the insects the coatis expose. This temporary association benefits both parties, even if unintentional. However, the concentration of life in these emerging areas also attracts predators. The coatis maintain a constant vigilance, interrupting their foraging at any unusual sound. The memory of encounters with jaguars and other predators is present in every sudden pause. In the increasingly shallow waters, the anaconda moves with difficulty. Its heavy body leaves furrows in the mud of the bottom as it moves between pools that are becoming disconnected. During high water, it could move freely across wide areas. Now, its territory is fragmented. It must choose its hiding place carefully. It seeks out pools that remain deep enough to cover its body and offer potential prey. The anaconda is not a chase hunter, so it relies on prey to approach its position. In pools that shrink too much, the risk of being exposed increases. At this stage, even the anaconda must adapt quickly or face scarcity. As the water continues to recede, the animals are forced to cross open areas to move between shelters. These crossings are moments of high vulnerability. The dried mud begins to harden in the sun, creating uneven surfaces that make it difficult for heavy herbivores to run. The jaguar takes advantage of these stretches to hunt, using the cover of the remaining vegetation to approach its prey. The caiman, for its part, moves between lagoons, leaving its body exposed on land at times, which makes it vulnerable to attacks by adult jaguars. In this transitional phase, the roles of predator and prey become less stable. The caiman can be a hunter in deep water, but on land its limited mobility makes it a potential prey. The Pantanal at this moment is a mosaic of overlapping landscapes. Areas that still retain the appearance of the rainy season coexist with areas already showing signs of incipient drought. This heterogeneity forces animals to make quick decisions and modify their movement patterns almost daily. The memory of safe routes becomes a vital resource. Individuals who remember where to find deep water or vegetation cover have a greater chance of survival. Those who make mistakes pay the price. During this period, abundance begins to transform into direct competition. The stage is set for the toughest phase of the cycle, when water becomes concentrated in a few refuges and the struggle for those spaces becomes inevitable. The transition continues, and with it the Pantanal enters a period where the landscape is neither entirely water nor entirely land. It is an intermediate, unstable territory where the maps of refuge and danger are rewritten daily. The lagoons that still retain depth become nodes of life. Around them, the vegetation becomes shorter and more brittle. The damp mud transforms into an irregular crust that cracks in the sun's heat. The air changes density. It is no longer the constant humidity of the flood, but a heavy heat that demands precise energy management from the animals. The Pantanal begins to tighten its grip. Large herbivores feel the pressure first. The marsh deer, accustomed to moving with relative freedom during floods, now has to calculate every step. Its long legs, designed for wading in deep water, sink into the soft mud in some areas and slip on surfaces that have already dried out. The movement becomes slower, more predictable. This exposes it to hunters. Jaguars observe these patterns carefully. Each repeated movement becomes an opportunity. At the edges of the emerging forests, marsh deer pause to feed on shoots that have grown as the water recedes. These are patches of nutritious vegetation, but they are also ambush points. The silence in these areas is deceptive. Beneath the apparent calm, every sound betrays a presence. Capybaras, in tighter groups than during the flood, move among the last bodies of water that still have enough depth to offer refuge. The water is no longer a continuous expanse where they can disperse. Now it is a network of pools connected by muddy channels. Each movement between one place and another involves crossing open terrain. At those moments, the group's vigilance intensifies. Some individuals stop, raise their heads, and scan their surroundings. Alarm calls become more frequent. The accumulated stress manifests itself in abrupt movements and sudden changes of direction. The need for food and drink competes with the constant fear of ambush. Alligators trapped in shrinking lagoons experience a different kind of pressure. The reduction in water volume not only concentrates prey, but also increases competition among them. Larger individuals dominate the central areas where the water remains deeper and cooler. Smaller individuals are relegated to the edges where the water warms up more quickly and oxygen levels decrease. This inequality increases juvenile mortality. Younger, weaker alligators are exposed to attacks from adults or become trapped in pools that dry up completely. Under these conditions, some caimans attempt to move overland to other lagoons, risking encounters with jaguars. Every decision involves a risk calculation, remaining in a dwindling refuge or crossing hostile territory. The giant otters, which took advantage of the concentration of fish during the transition period, now face a different dilemma. The lagoons they visited days ago no longer offer the same volume of prey. The group must expand its range of movement, traveling greater distances between increasingly isolated bodies of water. This means crossing areas of dry mud and low vegetation, where cover is minimal. The family moves quickly, maintaining strict cohesion. Vocalizations increase, not only for internal communication, but also as a warning to other predators. The group strategy becomes more defensive. When they detect the presence of a large caiman in a lagoon, otters may choose not to hunt there even if fish are available. The risk of a direct confrontation in confined spaces is too high. Energy efficiency becomes paramount. Expending energy on a dangerous hunt could jeopardize long-term survival. In the more open areas of the wetland, where the grassland begins to dry out, fires become a latent threat. Although they don't always ignite immediately, the dry vegetation and heat create conditions for any spark to cause a fire to spread rapidly. Animals sense the change in the air before the flames appear. The smell of dry vegetation, the crackling of brittle stems in the wind are signs that the landscape is becoming more volatile. At this stage, their movements become more erratic. Some herbivores gather in areas that still retain moisture, while others disperse in search of alternative shelters. Habitat fragmentation is intensified not only by the retreat of water, but also by the appearance of temporary barriers created by burned areas or by the threat of imminent fire. At the edges of the forest, coatis adjust their daily routes. Where they once easily found insects and fruit, they must now explore wider areas. Their activity exposes them to predators that also expand their foraging range due to the relative scarcity of prey. While jaguars prefer large prey, they don't ignore opportunities when they arise. During periods of extreme pressure, even medium-sized prey like coatis can become viable targets. The dietary flexibility of predators becomes more evident at this stage of the cycle. In increasingly shallow lagoons, the anaconda adopts a strategy of prolonged immobility. Its slow metabolism allows it to wait long periods without feeding, but the reduction of its aquatic habitat forces it to choose positions where it can still partially hide. In very small pools, its body occupies a significant portion of the water volume, making it more visible. This not only affects its hunting ability, but also exposes it to detection by other large predators, including jaguars, which sometimes attack young or weakened anacondas. At this stage, even an apex predator can become potential prey if its mobility is compromised. Waterfowl change their behavior noticeably. As water levels drop, many species concentrate their activity in the last remaining deep lagoons. The flocks become denser. This increases competition for resources, but also increases the risk of disease transmission in concentrated populations. Physiological stress manifests as more worn feathers and aggressive behavior among individuals that normally coexist with relative tolerance. Reduced living space forces them into unnatural living conditions, disrupting their usual social dynamics. In the air, the macaws continue to move between patches of forest that still have fruit-bearing palm trees. The receding water makes it easier to access areas that were inaccessible from land during the flood. but it also exposes old trees that are essential for nesting. Human pressure intensifies during these periods when the terrain becomes passable. This adds another layer of threat to the already complex ecological situation. Macaws must adjust their routes not only based on food availability, but also to avoid areas where human activity increases during the onset of the dry season. In this context of habitat loss, the jaguar becomes a key regulator of herbivore populations that concentrate around the last remaining water sources. Its presence imposes an order based on fear. The animals modify their activity schedules, reduce their time spent in open areas, and increase their vigilance. This indirect effect of the predator on prey behavior influences the landscape structure. Areas where jaguars hunt more frequently experience less grazing pressure, allowing vegetation to partially recover. Thus, even in the most stressful phase of the system, large predators play a regulatory role that contributes to the long-term resilience of the wetland. As the transition phase nears its end, the Pantanal shows clear signs that the dry season is approaching. Water no longer defines the landscape, it is now the exception, not the rule. Refugees are reduced to specific points and life is concentrated around them. This concentration sets the stage for the harshest phase of the annual cycle, when water becomes critically scarce and every puddle turns into a silent battleground. The Pantanal reaches its most extreme point when the dry season fully sets in. What was once a mosaic of lagoons connected by waterways is now reduced to a collection of isolated pools, some deep, others so shallow that the mud at the bottom is exposed to the sun for hours. The landscape becomes harsh, almost mineral. The vibrant green of the flood gives way to ochre and yellowish tones. The earth cracks, and the air acquires a harsh quality that dries the throat and makes each breath heavier. In this scenario, life doesn't stop, but it is compressed. Every organism must readjust its physiological and behavioral limits to survive a period in which scarcity defines every decision. Animals converge on the last remaining pockets of water as if following an invisible map. Capybaras, marsh deer, waterfowl, reptiles, and fish all congregate around the same spots. This convergence creates an unusual biological density, where species that rarely encountered each other during the flood now share the same confined space. The result is constant tension. The herbivores take turns drinking, approaching the water's edge in tight groups, ready to flee at the slightest sign of danger. The surface of the pool reflects a still sky, but beneath that tranquility lie open jaws and tense bodies. Alligators dominate the deeper aquatic refuges. Their presence imposes a brutal order. In a pool where the water level barely covers the back of an adult alligator, any fish that approaches is within range of a swift ambush. The caiman doesn't chase, it waits. In the dry season, patience becomes the most effective strategy. The largest individuals monopolize the best shelters, forcing the smaller ones to move to poorer pools or attempt dangerous land migrations. Many do not survive. Juvenile mortality increases dramatically. However, this selective pressure maintains the population structure. Individuals that manage to overcome the drought emerge stronger, with defined territories and a greater probability of reproducing when the rains return. Giant otters, which expanded their range of movement during the transition period, now face a critical dilemma. Bodies of water that still harbor fish are becoming increasingly scarce. The family must decide whether to remain in a pool that still offers food at the risk of encountering dominant caimans or move to another refuge, crossing vast stretches of dry land where exposure to heat and predators increases. In this phase, group cohesion is essential. The otters move together, maintaining visual and vocal contact. When they enter a new pool, they don't immediately begin hunting. First, they assess the presence of caimans, observing the water's surface for subtle signs, minute ripples, bubbles that betray hidden breathing. If they detect a high risk, they can retreat without hunting, even when the need for food is urgent. This ability to forgo an immediate opportunity in favor of long-term survival is one of the keys to their success as social predators in an extreme environment. During the dry season, the jaguar becomes a near-constant presence around water sources. Where life is concentrated, so is the predator. The feline patrols the edges of the pools, following routes it memorizes with precision. Every herbivore footprint in the dry mud is a clue. Every scent in the air tells it of nearby prey. The jaguar doesn't hunt randomly. It observes for long periods. It learns the times when capybaras come down to drink, identifies the spots where marsh deer usually approach the water. The drought simplifies the landscape, but it also makes it more predictable. This predictability favors the patient hunter. However, the concentration of prey also means competition. Other jaguars patrol similar areas. Encounters between felines become more frequent and more aggressive. Territorial disputes intensify. A dominant jaguar can drive younger individuals out of prime hunting grounds, forcing them to move to marginal areas with fewer resources. Thus, drought not only reduces prey availability, but also reconfigures the social structure of apex predators. The marsh deer faces one of the most challenging periods of its annual cycle. Grazing areas shrink and forage quality declines. The animal must travel greater distances between patches of green vegetation, exposing itself to predators for longer periods. Its long legs, adapted for deep water, move with difficulty on the hardened ground. Fatigue accumulates. In this phase, younger individuals or those weakened by illness are the first to succumb. Jaguars select prey that show signs of weakness, thus reducing the pressure on healthier individuals. This process, although brutal, helps maintain the population in a relatively robust state when favorable conditions return. In the air, the macaws continue to move among patches of palm trees that still bear fruit. The water shortage doesn't directly affect their access to food, but it does alter the availability of safe places to rest and nest. Old trees, essential for reproduction, become more accessible to humans during the dry season, increasing disturbance in some areas. The birds, sensitive to these changes, adjust their flight paths, avoiding areas where human activity increases. This ability to modify movement patterns in response to external pressure is a form of behavioral adaptation that can make the difference between reproductive success and failure. As the drought reaches its peak, the Pantanal seems to enter a kind of tense pause. Movement slows during the hottest hours of the day. Many animals reduce their activity to conserve energy and avoid dehydration. Night becomes the main period of activity for predators and prey. The moonlit night landscape reveals silhouettes moving cautiously among shimmering pools. Every sound is amplified in the silence of the dry wetland. The crackle of a branch can mean prey on the move or a predator approaching. The darkness somewhat levels the playing field. The jaguar's sharp vision competes with the herbivore's auditory perception, and the caiman's stealth becomes even more effective in the dark water. However, even at the height of the drought, the Pantanal does not stop. Beneath the surface of the dried mud, seeds await the next flood. In the bodies of animals, fat reserves accumulated during the flood sustain vital functions. The ecological memory of the system remains dormant. Each species has evolved to withstand this annual bottleneck. Drought is not an anomaly, it is a structural part of the cycle that shapes the composition of the wetland. Individuals that cannot endure this phase disappear. Those that survive emerge with a competitive advantage when the first rains return. The first distant rumble of thunder marks the end of this stage. It brings no immediate relief, but it heralds change. The air smells different before the first drops fall. Animals react to these subtle signs. Some move to lower ground, anticipating the return of the rain. Others remain in their shelters, waiting for the landscape to expand once more. The dry season, with all its harshness, serves its purpose. It concentrates, selects, redefines. When the water returns, the Pantanal will be reborn once again, not as it was before, but as the result of this relentless process of adjustment and survival.